In the United States of today, the nation's capital occupies in the public consciousness a place which could scarcely have been conceived of 2 or 3 decades ago. And Washington's Union Station has become one of the busiest and most important railway terminals in the country. Through it, passengers from more than 140 trains a day stream into the capital from all corners of the land. Legislators and businessmen, lobbyists and reformers, financiers and diplomats, newsmen and military men. 3 million men and women a year come to transact business, to grind axes, or just to see the sights. Next to government, Washington's main industry is sightseeing. In countless guidebooks, tourists can learn that Washington, founded at the end of the 18th century, is unique among world capitals, having been designed and built solely as a seat of government. That it was planned by Pierre L'Enfant, French engineer who served in the American Revolution, and that it is today one of the largest U.S. cities, with a peacetime population of more than 500,000, which is nearly doubled in wartime. Prominent among tourist landmarks are monuments to 3 of the nation's great presidents. Oldest is the 500-foot Washington Monument, completed in 1884. Newest is the memorial to Thomas Jefferson, dedicated in 1943. It is in the neoclassic style, which Jefferson always preferred. Most impressive to tourists is the serene and lovely Lincoln Memorial, built of white marble in the Doric order of Greek architecture. Within it is a statue of Lincoln designed by Daniel Chester French. It is widely recognized as one of the best of the nation's many Lincoln statues. Proclaimed at its dedication as a shrine at which all can worship, this is a memorial not merely to one of the greatest of Americans, but to the American ideals and aspirations which Lincoln embodied in his Gettysburg Address, in sentences as clean and spare and beautiful as the lines of the temple which today houses them. Arlington Cemetery across the Potomac River in Virginia is the great national burial ground. Here lie thousands who died in the various wars fought to preserve the nation, and with them are buried other thousands of great or little note who in their lives helped to build and shape it. The famed Arlington Amphitheater, erected as a memorial to the heroic dead of the nation's armed forces, was designed as a setting for patriotic and military ceremonials. Most sought out by visitors is the simple block of marble beneath which lies the unknown soldier of World War I, guarded by a lone sentry. A couple of miles away at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue stands one of the world's great residences of state. Built in the 1790s, burned by the British in 1814, restored and remodeled many times, the White House still stands out as a modest gem of architecture in a city noted for the impressiveness of its public buildings. Here has lived every chief executive of the United States since the second president, John Adams. And each of them has added something to the historical associations which are felt by every visitor to the White House. Through the state dining room has passed a long and illustrious procession of statesmen, diplomats, and visiting monarchs to dine in formal splendor as guests of the nation's presidents. The famed Red Room, with its portrait by Sargent of President Theodore Roosevelt, was formerly used as a reception room at elaborate state functions. Today it is chiefly used to receive guests at small dinners. Apart from the rooms which in peacetime are open to the public is the swimming pool installed for Franklin D. Roosevelt. And on the floors above the public rooms are the private living quarters of the presidents and their families. In those quarters where no tourists penetrate, the personal tastes and interests of the successive chief executives are expressed in the furnishings and decorations chosen by each. And here, each president leads what little private life is possible for one called to this exalted office. Less frequently the scene of huge public receptions now than in times past, The White House has come more and more to reflect the tempo of modern government, as the office and home of perhaps the hardest working executive in the land. Dominating the entire city is the massive Capitol building, under construction from George Washington's presidency through that of Abraham Lincoln. Home of the legislative branch of the American government, it houses the Senate in its north wing, the House of Representatives in its south. The sessions of both bodies are open to the public. On the floor of the Senate and the House, lawmaking is carried on in full view of visitors. Always keeping a sharp eye on current legislation from the congressional press galleries are the Washington newsmen, who serve as unofficial watchdogs of the people. Their reports to the nation are an essential part of the democratic process. Relations between the chief executive and the leaders of Congress do much to determine how smoothly the legislative machinery works. For Congress has always been jealous of its powers and wary of any attempts at presidential domination. To save time for busy senators, a private subway runs between the Senate office building, where they do much of their work, and the Capitol, where they must frequently be on hand for legislative sessions and committee sessions. The senator who would keep abreast of his duties as a legislator must make use of every minute of his time. Even in the Senate restaurant, he cannot afford to relax over his lunch. For the days in which the nation ran itself without much reference to Washington are gone, and the legislative process has become progressively more complex and difficult. In these days of big government, the multiplicity of bills under consideration calls increasingly for a wider understanding of more and more involved issues on the part of lawmakers. And to deal with these bills, a maze of committees, often overlapping each other, has been set up in both houses. The working day of the conscientious congressman is long and hard, and the pay he gets for it is in many cases small compared to what he might earn in business. Though each congressman receives an allowance for office employees, paperwork and routine matters constantly infringe on time which should be devoted to legislative duties.
Here's the first mail, and here are notices of 2 committee meetings, agriculture and post-war, and both of them are at 10 o'clock.
Okay. I'll get to those tonight, I hope. But right now, I want to try to do some of yesterday's mail and get it cleaned up before those committees at 10, if we can. You remember this veteran case of Fred White. I'd suggest that he contact his service office.
Much of every congressman's day is taken up by the visits of lobbyists and constituents. Since one of the congressman's first duties is to the people who elected him, he must take the time to give their many requests personal and tactful attention. Most important and most demanding of his duties is committee work. With so many standing and special committees functioning, one congressman may serve on as many as 8 or 9. To do a thorough job, he should be well informed in the fields covered by the committees to which he belongs. But he lacks an adequate research staff to provide him with unbiased information, as against the carefully packaged facts and figures thrown at him by pressure groups. However long his office hours, however conscientiously he may work at home, few congressmen can meet the schedule expected of them and still find time to keep themselves thoroughly informed on all the involved issues with which they must deal. Not far from the Capitol is the new Supreme Court building, where centers the authority of the 3rd branch of the federal government, the judicial. By means of legal decisions and interpretations handed down from the Supreme Court chambers, a flexible constitution written over 150 years ago is being constantly adapted to ever-changing needs of the nation. A long line of Chief Justices following John Jay, first among them, and the illustrious John Marshall, probably the greatest, has been instrumental in shaping the nation's constitutional history. Scattered throughout Washington are the buildings which house various executive departments of the government. Ranking first among them is the Department of State, whose home is a pretentious pile of granite reflecting the level to which architecture had sunk in President Grant's administration. From the Treasury Department, oldest government building in Washington, save the White House and the Capitol, all federal financial affairs are managed. World's biggest office structure is the War Department's Pentagon building, from which during the war were directed all the U.S. Army's immense activities. The Department of Agriculture carries on from imposing headquarters its business as a research and service agency for the nation's farmers. Youngest executive department is that of Labor, founded in 1913, in recognition of the growing importance of labor on the national scene. The Department of Commerce was organized to do for the businessman and industrialist what the Department of Agriculture does for the farmer and labor for the working man. The Department of Justice, concerned with the detection and prosecution of offenses against federal laws, is housed in one of Washington's handsomest buildings. In this building are the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, one of the great attractions of the capital for sightseers. Hundreds of thousands of visitors a year crowd into the Bureau to see exhibits of the spectacular scientific methods by which it solves crimes and to gape at relics of highly publicized criminals apprehended by FBI agents. Many visitors have added their fingerprints to the Bureau's civil identification files, for it is a part of the FBI's policy to encourage all citizens to register their fingerprints here as a means of establishing identity in cases of accident or other emergencies. Of more interest to the scholar than to the casual tourist is the National Archives building, in which most of the rarer and more valuable documents of government are preserved, along with historical value. One of the great libraries of the world, the Library of Congress, contains more than 5 million books and pamphlets, 2.5 million maps, charts, and musical compositions, and countless original manuscripts. Here, surrounded by the ornate excesses of the Renaissance as interpreted by 19th century architects, are preserved the nation's two most priceless documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. But though filled with monuments and museums and public buildings richly associated with the past, Washington's greatest days may well lie in the future. For in a world drawn ever more closely together by speed of communication, the United States is destined to play a more active and decisive role than in the past. A role dramatized at the Washington airport by the planes bound for and arriving from the far corners of the earth. And as America faces her future, her citizens recognize that Washington can never again limit her vision to the boundaries of the nation, but from now on must look beyond to the uttermost horizons of the world.